I'm gonna just start the live by introducing myself and the Hoodwink Collective. So my name is Alejandría Lyons, the Coalition Coordinator for New Mexico No Fall Solutions, hopping on the Hoodwinked in the Hot House IG today. Today, this is, we're trying to, celebrate Earth Week, but each day, Earth Week, every day. And we're here with a bunch of activists, organizers, individual water and land protectors that are working against false solutions and decolonial organizing from youth and indigenous perspectives. So just real quick, the Hoodwink Collaborative is a coalition of climate justice organizations, activists dedicated to producing popular education, organizing resistance against false solutions to the climate crisis. In 2021, the collaborative published the groundbreaking educational zine, also known as Hoodwinked in the Hot House. It's the same name as the Instagram handle. Third edition, Resist False Solutions to Climate Change, presenting a stunning illustrated compendium of the false corporate promises that continue the hoodwink elected officials, the public, protecting systems of extractivism and colonialism while deferring the real solutions needed for climate change, taking perspectives from folks like we have today, really. So over the last 2 years, the collaborative has printed over 47,000 copies of Hoodwinked in 5 different languages to distribute among grassroots groups, as well as the UNFCCC Conference of Party Spaces, produced an audiobook, has hosted several widely known webinars and widely attended. So these efforts continue to widen the opposition to harmful corporate climate schemes around the world. To find more information or to listen to Hoodwink or read it in whatever language, please visit climatefalsesolutions.org. So I think I saw Leona on. That's just a quick bit about Hoodwink. So thank you all for joining from all of your accounts. I'm going to pass it to Shah to just briefly introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Shah Merirei. I am Micronesian, Palawan. I currently work as a director of digital strategy at Digital Climate Coalition, as well as being the executive director at Pacifica Uprising. And the work I do is education, information dissemination, getting the word out about where climate justice, bodily autonomy, and decolonial futures all intersect. And that's often through media, whether it's animations, podcasts, short form videos, and also showing up at direct actions, because solidarity is not an esoteric or sort of abstract theoretical concept. Solidarity is just us caring about one another. And it's one way for us to honor our ancestors, is to show up in solidarity for our fellow Indigenous people. And I will popcorn it over to whoever wants to go next.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Leona.
Hey, so sorry, I'm late. I'm new to Instagram. I'm like an old lady here because this is only my second time using Instagram Live, and I'm really happy to be invited to talk about nuclear stuff. So I'm in New Mexico, just for my relatives, my Diné relatives. I'll say my clans real quickly. Yeah, so your apartment now, and we're in Albuquerque, New Mexico, on Julia's people's land, and I'm Diné, so my people are a couple hours to the west, and I've been working a lot on uranium mining issues, and now there's a lot of push for new nuclear because of this idea, this false solution that it's going to help with the climate crisis, and we can talk more about that later. So Thanks, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see folks joining the live feed. My name's Julia Bernal. I am from San Diego Pueblo, Tiwa speaking people here in the Middle Rio Grande of New Mexico. I'm the executive director for Pueblo Action Alliance, and we are a Pueblo women femme two-spirit-led organization here throughout the state of so-called New Mexico. Um, we work a lot with our Pueblo communities on climate justice, environmental justice, economic and social justice issues that directly impacts our communities and our homelands and our ancestral sites and sacred places. Um, we are also really involved in youth action work and um, you know, just like being a vehicle for our community members to access uh, information about things relating to environmental or natural resource planning, any sort of environmental justice issues that have to pertain to extractivism or other false climate solutions. And so we've been doing this work for over 6 years now as an organization, an operating organization, and are just really happy to be collaborators with Hoodwinked and the Hot House, and of course with all of the other organizers that are like on this call. I feel like just to echo what Shaw was saying around these ideals of global solidarity, having an internationalist analysis on climate initiatives and climate solutions is like really important to our work. And it definitely is a mechanism to help us build a lot more unified stances against global capitalism and other ways in which the 1% continue to extract our resources and exploit our people. So really happy to be here with you all today. I'll pass it back to Ale. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. Now I'm going to invite our last speaker, Jonathan from Youth United for Climate Crisis Action, to join. I might have to ask either Julia or Shaw if one of y'all can.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to leave.
I got it.
I guess I just. Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Awesome, and really happy to join all of you. Like Ali just said, my name is Jonathan Juarez Alonso. I'm 20 years old and I'm from the pueblos of Laguna and Isleta. I currently serve as the policy lead for Youth United for Climate Crisis Action. So YUCCA is a youth-led organization. We were founded in 2019, and we were founded around, just demands of our elected officials to, keep fossil fuels in the ground and rapidly transition our economy to 100% renewables. And since 2019, we've been continuing that fight through various campaigns. I think one of the most recent has been, our anti-hydrogen campaign. But yeah, we have hundreds of members throughout northern and central New Mexico, and it's been really awesome to join this team. I joined in 2021, but really awesome to join and build partnership, really across the state. I think that's something that we've been able to do that has just kind of congealed so beautifully and just come together in such a powerful way as young people, from all sorts of communities, Pueblo and Diné communities as well. It's just been, awesome to be a part of it, and awesome to join you all this evening, and excited to share the space. But yeah, I think I'm the last one, and I'll go ahead and hop off so that our other panelists can join back.
I'm willing to hop off if I can figure it out. But while our other guest is rejoining, I just want to share the book. I got some in the mail, so I'll be referring to that.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Leona, for showing that cover. Yeah, I'm so excited to know and work with all of you through No False Solutions. And here, I'm also located in Southern Tiwa Territory, also so-called Albuquerque. And yeah, I mean, we've been doing a lot of work specifically around hydrogen and carbon sequestration, but also, you know, hearing stories from across the state and regionally about the different false solutions. So, you know, I think we'll start off with Leona, but can you talk about, you know, some of your fighting against false solutions and, you know, the way you're supporting what you see as real solutions while centering specifically you know, decolonial ways of thinking, youth and climate organizing, yeah, in your vision. So a bit about what work you're doing and how you do it.
Sure. So I want to just maybe give a little a background for folks that don't know me, because I want to highlight the Kiva Club. I want to give a shout out to a student organization I used to be a part of like 20 years ago. So I'm really dating myself here. This was when I was an undergrad at UNM. And so the Kiva Club did a lot of really excellent work. And that's how I was introduced to EJ and all of this stuff. So I don't want to put down student organizing. I think it's really important. But I right now, fast forwarding, I worked with many organizations. So like the first group I spent a lot of time with is the Sage Council, which doesn't exist anymore. So they were working on sacred sites protection. And then Eastern Navajo Diné against uranium mining, which was fighting a uranium mine. They still are fighting that mine. We stopped it in 2014, and a different company has bought the permits. That's a longer story, but so some of the work I've done over the years, it was with some Diné groups, indigenous groups, and then later I got really involved with anti-nuke groups, which were mostly Bilagana. So a lot of white organizations in the East Coast and folks fighting both nuclear weapons and nuclear energy work. So I spent a long time working with non-native groups, building my own community knowledge about nuclear everything. And so that's how I did my work. A lot of it was just educating myself and then sharing that with everybody. So I was on a call earlier today listening to a young Diné woman talking about what it's like to organize on the res. So having to explain these really complicated concepts to our elders and then having to translate it. So I personally, I want to say I'm learning my language. I'm really learning, you know, my culture and things every day, but I'm not fluent. And so when I was working on the res back when we were fighting this uranium mine, a lot of the work I did was to tell the elders what's going on and then having a translator explain it. And so over time, this reality of our people not using English first as a language, it's, you know, our people speak Diné. Our elders, they don't even, you know, read Diné, Diné Bizad, because it isn't a written language. We had an oral history, our whole culture, everything was passed on orally. So how do we fight this big fight to stop a uranium mine or climate change when the reality is our people don't have access to internet, maybe even cell reception in some places? There's a lot of, you know, out in the rural areas, that's the reality, is our people don't have, some people don't have running water, much less high-speed internet. So what I did and the way I did my work was, this is going back into 2011 to 2014. I did a lot of driving, going to communities to give presentations and having paper handouts with a lot of information in a graphic way where people don't have to read so much, but kind of like an infographic, but not so much reading. You can go to my website. This is not a very updated website, but yeah, you can go to Diné, no nukes.org, and it'll show this page called the Radiation Monitoring Project. And if you scroll down, there's a link for resources on educational materials. So what we did was a lot of education in a way that was palpable for people. So I live in the city and I'm not on the res. I don't live in a contaminated area, but I spent a lot of time learning about the issue. I moved back home for about a year. And this is how I did my work, was to immerse myself in the community. Even though I'm Diné, I was still an outsider coming back home. So I had to understand my role as an outsider. So even though I am brown and my clans are from there, my relatives are living there, that didn't mean I was easily accepted into the community. A lot of people were interested in uranium issues because there's this thing called the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, where they can get funding to pay for their health bills, or you know, if they lost someone from uranium mining. So this was like a little bit of money. I mean, I'm saying a little bit, like I think it's like 150,000, but the RECA money, it was supposed to sunset last year. And so this is a huge issue across the nation federally, that we need RECA to continue. So when I was doing my work, people were more interested in their health problems, their water quality. So it was really hard to talk about capitalism or you know, neo-colonialism, all this stuff that we're talking about today. You know, my elders, they were just asking me, what's going to happen to my body? I live in a place where I was breathing this stuff in. I live in a place where the water's contaminated. Our sheep were drinking the water. Am I going to get sick? And so that's what people were asking me. They didn't care what was going on at the COP. Didn't even know about the COP, the United Nations convening of parties. I learned about climate change, I think in 2005 is the first time I heard the term. But I'll just wrap up by saying the work I did was basically translating English, these nuclear terms, all of the complicated stuff into simple language, and then further translating them graphically into a paper product that people could easily take home and use to understand what was going to happen to their body. So that's what they wanted to know. So I helped to develop this thing called the Radiation Monitoring Project. That was to help to educate people on the issues they wanted to know about. So that came out of the organizing to fight the uranium mine. So the things people really need on the ground are not necessarily the things we think are important, but somehow we have to figure out how to mix them or do both at the same time, somehow to honor what the community needs are, and then at the same time, hopefully stop the uranium mine, stop the hydrogen hub or incinerator, or, you know, whatever the community is fighting, because what they're fighting is also causing all these other problems, societal problems, economic, health, and that's what they're really dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So going to Congress, going to these meetings, that's not a priority when their kids, their elders are coughing and sick, and it's really heartbreaking. So that's why I do what I do. Is, you know, I'm kind of in the middle where I'm in the city and have access to some of the information and the resources, and then take it back home and then engage in things like this or the legislature. Yeah, so that's a little bit about my work. Sorry I went on. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Leona. I mean, I know that you do so much, so thank you for that snippet. Just a reminder for folks to follow everybody here that's speaking, and if they are tied to organizations, to follow that, but also the individuals, because folks like Leona are doing this on an individual basis. I think that's important. Let's hear from Shaw, Julia, and then we'll bring Jonathan on.
I can relate to a lot of what Leona said about kind of not being in this space, but being in this space. In my case, I don't know that they would consider me reconnecting. I was born and raised in Oregon to migrant parents, but my first language was their language. And that afforded me a really different experience with my upbringing, because it was during the 80s into early 90s that my parents were involved, and I'm a movement baby. So my parents were involved in anti-nuclear work and demilitarization work. The islands that my family is from, Palau, are part of the region known as Micronesia, and that includes the Federated States of Micronesia and the Republic of the Marshall Islands, as well as Nauru and Kiribati. For the three countries, Marshall Islands, Palau, and FSM, those are known as freely associated states, or they fall under the Compact of Free Association, which, if anyone ever hears this, free association is not free for anybody, especially not for the people on the non-US side of it. So part of the work I do with Pacifica Uprising and just on my own, and it's kind of the root of a lot of the climate justice and bodily autonomy work, is explaining our history and how we got to this point, and explaining that the Compact of Free Association, those are three separate treaties that the United States has with us. And obviously we know the United States treaties, it doesn't go well for anybody. Ours happened within my lifetime. And so we regained sovereignty in 1994, and Independence Day is just us being in our dependence on the United States. So that's where a lot of the work centers from. And then showing, because we are such a small country, Palau right now I think has a population of roughly 20,000 or just under it as a whole country. And that's with, I believe, a third of the population being foreigners. And so for the kids in the diaspora who grew up in the diaspora like me, we don't learn anything about where we're from unless our parents teach us. And a lot of times, because our parents are trying to assimilate, we don't learn things. And so the work I've been doing is trying to make our history and our culture more tangible and accessible, and relating it to what's going on here, because being part of the diaspora also means that we're settlers on Indigenous land. And I talk about how in order for us to connect, in order for us to honor our ancestors and our heritage, we have to stand in solidarity with the Indigenous people whose land we're on, and trying to show the cultural relevance and importance there is an opportunity for a lot of kids who, I mean, nieces, nephews, cousins, who don't speak the language, who don't know even the basics of the culture. This is a starting place that makes sense. And so being able to show up, whether it's on Line 3 or whether it was in DC, whether it was in Atlanta, and being part of those movements and showing that Pacifica people, especially in the diaspora, we have a space there. And it's our responsibility to be in these spaces to uphold and uplift and amplify the other Indigenous people, the people whose land we're on. Because if my ancestors were alive, they would be like, yes, of course you have to do that. I'm here. And so it's teaching and making culture relevant based on the spaces that we're in, and also teaching them our political history, because not a lot of people have the time to sit down and read a 300-page document that basically explains why we're independent, but we don't get to make decisions, why our currency is US currency, why our post office is the US post office, why we're independent but rely on the United States for so many things. And at the same time, they continue to throw us under the bus. And so teaching those things, teaching that the United States military is not the only option to get off an island, teaching people that what the United States military does, what the Department of Defense does, is devastating our natural resources, what it's doing to the land, and how it's now written into our treaties that we've lost so much ability to have that self-determination despite being told that we're sovereign. And so teaching them that history and showing how it's very parallel to the history here and why these things connect and why we need to work together in forming that cohesive voice and like doing the work. That's really kind of like the root of where this comes from. And tying it in with bodily autonomy and showing people how like, and this was taught to me by one of my best friends that I can't believe I never thought of, but like everything spiritual is practical. Everything practical is spiritual. And so things that we take for granted, things we don't think about when it comes to like sustainability and to food sovereignty and to food security, how that fell apart for us at home because of colonization, because of where the military is now and what they're doing to us now. And tying that into, we live in the United States now, this is how it's the same thing is impacting people, and building relationships off of that so that we can work together, because obviously more voices, more bodies is the last thing they want to see from us. And of course, we want to upset people in positions of power and authority. But that's a bulk of the work I do. And if I do a good enough job, I will work myself out of a job and the next generation will come in and take over for me, and I can just drink tea and lay in bed and be like, look at them, they're so amazing. Because I love Gen Z so much. They're so amazing. And that's my spiel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sha. I think that was like super inspiring, and I didn't realize you were from Palau. It's amazing. Yeah, Julia, do you want to go next? And then Jonathan?
Yeah. Just want to appreciate everything that Shaw and Leona have shared in terms of like the why we get involved in this work, or um, this continuation of historic Indigenous resistance and uprising is just like really inspiring, especially since sometimes I know that we feel like we're up against so much. To be aligned in that way is really awesome. But yeah, so just real quickly, just some of the work that we've been involved in here in New Mexico, or so-called New Mexico. Um, our region is very resource rich in fact so much that it's become a energy sacrifice zone. A lot of the times we say like New Mexico is ground zero for a lot of continuing energy infrastructure, but also like new energy infrastructure. Some of us in our organizations have even said that like we're the guinea pigs of emerging technologies around energy development and energy storage and production. And so we had really started our work in coalition with the Greater Chaco Coalition, that is in terms of the geography, that's the northwestern corner of New Mexico, or what they call like the Four Corners area, or the San Juan Basin. And this is a highly productive oil and gas extractive area, and has been for some time now. I think since the early 1900s, oil has been extracted from that region. But within that area also has a large indigenous population. Mostly Diné folks have been living and occupying in that region for some time now. But for Pueblo people, there's also a very important sacred site, like right in the middle of all of this devastation, and that's Chaco Canyon. And so it's been a movement where we are demanding the phase out of fossil fuels and the cleanup and remediation of those areas. But also the protection of cultural and historic landscapes that have many indigenous stakeholders involved, tribal nations, sovereign tribal nations, who are oftentimes fighting for free, prior, informed consent, and to be a part of full cultural landscape planning. Because while it's been under the federal jurisdiction, there's just been a lot of environmental and health impacts in the area. So, you know, moving into this conversation, this narrative around false solutions, we are now facing a lot of new energy infrastructure as um, you know, a neoliberal agenda would like us to think that we're in the beginning stages of a just transition, but ultimately, a lot of the times we are just continuing the fossil fuel era um, by way of carbon capture and sequestration or blue hydrogen or you know, using those different types of energy technologies to uh, invest more dollars into just, you know, strengthening and continuing this like network of infrastructure that's meant to just extract. And so a lot of our work now is just really trying to unpack like how this even began in the first place. You know, tying its roots directly to colonialism and systems of oppression and, um, you know, just the way that colonialism trends over time. We're seeing that in the midst of climate change, our government is really focusing on protecting like small portions of biodiversity, but continuing to extract as, you know, business as usual, or using other types of market-based mechanisms to, um, you know, reach net zero pledges and offset carbon at different areas of the world. And so, really, just seeing how insidious global capitalism continues to be, um, but also recognizing how indigenous resistance and people of color mobilization and frontline community analysis is really like what's um, what's the what's you know doing its part to dismantle those oppressive systems. And so that's been a lot of the work that we've been doing at Global Action Alliance, but of course none of that would be able to be like accomplished without being in coalition with other organizations like New Mexico No False Solutions, like YUCCA, like Hoodwinked in the Hot House, and then I even think by way of other large coalitions like People versus Fossil Fuels has also been a mechanism for us to continue to state our demands of keeping it in the ground, no false solutions, and a real just economic transition for all of us. So I'll go ahead and stop there and let Jonathan take over.
Yeah,
So
thank you so
thank you.
much. It's awesome to spend this evening with some badass matriarchs from communities, you know, across the world. Um, so yeah, again, my name is Jonathan Juarez Alonso. I'm from the pueblos of Laguna and Isleta, both of which are just outside of so-called Albuquerque here in Tewa territories. Um, I really got involved in the work through journalism. It was actually the first place that I got involved, and it's still kind of like a side passion of mine. But I was at Generation Justice, which is a project of KUNM, our local public radio station, and was basically kind of just a correspondent going out to different community events and protests, and covering, you know, kind of covering the movement from the outside. And a lot of what we focused on there was, you know, narrative shifting and making sure that we're, you know, telling our stories from our perspective and the perspectives that we want to actually, you know, be uplifting rather than, you know, what opposition or what, you know, the white mainstream is constantly wanting to say about us. We want to make sure they're, you know, we're kind of disrupting that flow and putting out the media that our communities want to see as well. So, you know, I joined Generation Justice. I was like 13. I can't do math at the moment, but then in 2016, that's when I actually went to Standing Rock as like a journalist, and was able to do interviews with water protectors who had been arrested, and other, Indigenous frontline folks that were holding that ground there. But that was really, I would say, where my shift was from, being behind the camera and kind of covering these stories to then, okay, well, now I want to actually kind of be in front of the camera. I want to be involved and actually doing the work. And so I came back home to Tiwa Territories, really kind of just charged up. This is also, the year of the 2016 election, which, polarized and just kind of brought so much into the political spotlight. So, that mindset drove me into getting involved with, almost every organization here in Albuquerque. I think a lot of young activists kind of have that stage where they're in almost a little bit of everything, and it's a little hectic. But then you kind of find your place and you settle down and you figure out exactly what you want to be doing. So for me, I was doing, youth-led organizing from the beginning. I was really noticing that in these spaces, there's a lot of ageism towards young people that, we don't want to, take young people seriously. We don't want to give them a space at the table. We've even heard of some of our elected officials say, they can't vote, so, they basically don't matter to them. And so, all these other things. But going, with that mindset, then driving me to kind of create my own organization spaces. And I was doing that from 2019 to 2021. And then, like I said, in 2021, I was brought on for, staff for YUCCA. But in 2019, YUCCA actually formed kind of as our community's response to the climate crisis and to, calls coming from across the world that we need to be taking, these emission reduction standards and, keeping fossil fuels, fracking moratoriums, just these bold pieces of action that we need to be taking them extremely seriously, especially in states like New Mexico, where we're one of the largest contributors to global emissions. So it was actually, primarily Indigenous, Two-Spirit, queer young people from northern New Mexico that actually spent a week-long strategic planning training. We hosted every year now. It's called our El Puente Summer Leadership Academy. It's actually been hosted every year by our parent organization, EarthCare. But YUCCA was formed in 2019 out of that leadership academy, and has really, gone on to continue the call for those original demands of keeping fossil fuels in the ground and, a rapid transition to a renewable economy. And, kind of back to the question, how we do this is, really through a diversity of tactics for us. So, and I think that's, something that YUCCA does a really beautiful job of exemplifying. We have, some more theatrical actions where we staged actual mock guillotines outside our state capitol, where the ropes that were holding the blades were frozen in ice to kind of, symbolize the time and, the time factor and how inaction today will directly lead to, deadly consequences to young people, primarily Indigenous young people in the future. We've also, we've had civil disobedience actions where when we delivered our demands, we delivered them in, I believe it was September. It was a week after the climate strike, so it was September 30th of 2019, and we gave Governor Lujan Grisham a 30-day deadline to take action before, we would return. And to, put things into context in our demands, there's a lot of different courses of action that could have been taken. The easiest of which would have just, been to declare a climate emergency in the state of New Mexico, which is essentially, the stroke of a pen. And, that 30-day deadline came up and we still hadn't seen any action come out of the governor's office. So we actually hosted a civil disobedience action where 21 of our members, adult allies of our organization, were actually arrested in the governor's office just for their charges to then be dismissed in court by the judge. So, civil disobedience, protesting, direct action. We also, as I mentioned, I'm the policy lead, so we also definitely play this political game that is very frustrating. And as I mentioned, we don't necessarily see policy or this political cycle system to, be the end-all be-all or to be the mechanism that's going to bring out, the liberation of our communities, but also recognizing that we have to participate in a harm reduction in a harm reduction stance, and from that space where we're, recognizing that while, these systems were never made for us, they're never going to benefit us. If we don't show up to participate, then opposition, the people that don't have our interests in mind at all, will kind of have full reign of the conversation. So, with that, we've been showing up to all of the different committee hearings for different pieces of legislation that we've been supporting, things like local choice energy and the uranium, the prohibition of uranium storage or nuclear waste storage here in New Mexico, something that I think we're going to talk about tonight as well. But also, bills that we oppose, like the Advanced Energy Technology Act, other bills that we definitely see as false solutions because, they include these technologies like carbon capture and sequestration, like offsets, like net zero pledges, all of which we've seen across the world are just being used to prolong the fossil fuels life here in New Mexico and across the global South. So, I think for me, what really drives the passion for the work is, remembering, and I think all of us obviously relate to this, but just remembering where we come from, the lines of resistance that all of us have been born into. I was also born into a movement family, but also, as a Pueblo person, really honoring and trying to, just honor and live out the legacy, being a descendant of Pueblo revolutionaries, just, recognizing that in 1680, there was, a massive rebellion against the Spanish conquistadors here in New Mexico. And it was a unification of several tribes that didn't even speak the same languages. But to see, to remember that history and know that, that was our community's response to, at the time, we had seen the Spanish as completely disrupting our way of life that had been in balance with our natural world since time immemorial, and particularly their taxes that, because of the droughts that we have here in New Mexico, the Spanish were unprepared. They began taxing food at a rate that we could no longer afford. And so that really, kind of pushed things over the edge. But to see, that type of resistance in response to that disruption of our way of life, and then to think, I think about this all the time. But if my ancestors, could see today, and I know that they can, but physically, if they could be here and see the Rio Grande running dry year after year, or if they could walk into the Grand Kiva at Chaco, and see the fracking wells and see the ways in which industry and, colonialism have continued to prey on what we have always deemed to be sacred and protected and sacred, as sacred. And I wonder, what their response would be, knowing that in the past their response was actually the only successful rebellion against the U.S. empire in Northern America, but also, something that we, to this day, can see we're one of the only tribes that are still where we were found upon first contact, and as a result, we still maintain so much of our languages and our ceremonies that have existed since time immemorial, as a direct result of that rebellion. And so, carrying on that legacy and that passion in this fight. And yeah, also a quick note, this is not a first, this is like second generation for us. Being from the Pueblo of Laguna, we had the largest uranium mine. Jackpile uranium mine is the largest open air uranium mine in the world. To this day, it's an EPA Superfund site. But I actually, my family was part of a lawsuit that made it to the Supreme Court that was ultimately dismissed because they couldn't provide a legal deed to the land that we've occupied for centuries. But then, kind of as a result, and my grandfather growing up in, in that environment of, resisting pollution and, colonization of our lands, he, would ultimately move and relocate his family to Albuquerque. And so recognizing that environmental racism, directly did push my family off of our homelands. But yeah, that's what led me to this fight. That's a little spiel on YUCCA and our diversity of tactics that we deploy to pursue these demands that we're pushing for. But yeah, I'm going to hop off and let Julia get back on.
Thanks, Jonathan. I mean, I think everybody had so much to share and offer, and I just, appreciate you all for, spending this evening, having this event on Instagram. I really want to just shout out Hoodwinked for allowing us to have this space, because really what we're doing not only is just conversing, we're sharing tactics, we're sharing information. And I think that's really what the collective is all about, is about sharing our stories and learning the different ways in which we can continue to build a resistance that is grassroots, that is youth-led and Indigenous and BIPOC centered. I wanted to see if the audience had questions to comment, and then, the speakers too, if there was any quick reflections as we wait for some of the questions to come in from the audience. Yeah, any reflections that folks had hearing each other?
I think for me, it's like hearing everyone's like stories or ways in which they connect with this type of work. It's just a reminder that on a global scale, a lot of these stories of displacement or um, you know, entering into these advocacy types of lifestyles are very similar. Um, all over the world. And so knowing that, knowing the different ways in which colonialism has impacted our communities, still to this day, is just a really important analysis that I think a lot of us have been really trying to center, because a lot of the times, frontline communities, Indigenous youth, environmental justice communities don't always have a seat at the table and are often being spoken over or undermined, in terms of how we're going to address these issues in the future. And I just want to point out that a lot of the false solutions work is decentering, this more like European or white settler analysis, and making sure that Indigenous peoples are leading this fight, that frontline folks are also included in any sort of future planning that has to do with resource extraction, or you just whatever it is. It's been named not just like in the grassroots organizing movement, but even through the recent IPCC reports. It clearly states that there needs to be diverse stakeholder engagement, and also the utilization of Indigenous knowledge and worldview to also address climate crisis. And so just want to acknowledge that, there's folks like here, Indigenous folks here, that are have dedicated their lives to this work and are still like trying to center their people's analysis. It's just a really important aspect of this work that I think is just a huge system change for many. But um, I just, yeah, again, just wanted to acknowledge that after listening to everybody's sort of origin stories for getting involved in this work.
Sha, were you gonna comment? I wasn't sure, like right before Julia spoke, if you were gonna
I
say
actually had a question for my fellow speakers, and that's for youth who are interested in getting involved, and I think it's fairly accurate to say that advocacy, activism, and any sort of social justice work, when you're doing it within cultures that are very connected to like their heritage, their traditions, something that we come across a lot is having our opposition be some of our elders. And have you come across that? And how do you speak to Indigenous youth who are interested, but they've had maybe not the best experiences in bringing these things up, to whether it's elders in their family, their community, or elders who are just very like interested in like not seeing change.
Yeah, I know that Jonathan, had brought up the Pueblo Revolt as like a really important part of our history. And I think a lot of like young people, like Pueblo people that have been wanting to get more involved in this work, acknowledge that history and want to make sure that it remains relevant in our fight against extractivism. Um, I feel like that is like an important way for us to move about spaces where our elders aren't always in line or always agree with like direct action, or with being unapologetically in opposition of capitalism, or whatever it is. I think like the young people have been really embracing our history of resistance, and um, it gives me a lot of it gives me a lot of, I guess, solace knowing that that way of thinking is changing, and I do feel like even though like there may be moments where elders do push back on the way in which we're approaching the climate crisis, there are definitely those that support young people in this work. And by uplifting these concepts of making intergenerational spaces also lends opportunity for elders to learn from the youth, as like the youth are supposed to learn from our elders. Like there's this reciprocity that happens when you're building those very intentional intergenerational or multi-generational organizing spaces. I find that as a really effective tool for trying to continue to teach our people like why it's so important for us to take really strong and bold stances um, to address climate and to engage with climate mitigation strategies. But um, we have to always like remember our history, keep it relevant, and I think that you know now in this new tech age, we have a lot more accessibility to resources and tools, and I think that's also um, giving us more opportunities to connect with who our ancestors were and what they fought for and why they fought for it. So, but I would also maybe I'll jump off and let Jonathan jump back on too if he wants to speak to any of the youth work that he's been doing with YUCCA.
Okay, just to respond, I guess. Can you repeat the question?
Not a problem. In our community, we often have youth who may be interested, they show some interest, and then they come up against own elders, whether it's traditional leaders, community leaders, politicians, people that we're supposed to look up to, who do not have our future in mind as they make their decisions. And that can be really disheartening and really just take away all of the wind in your sails when you want to do this work. And so I was wondering, have you come up against that within your own communities, and how have you dealt with it?
So thanks for repeating that. I guess just to jump in before Jonathan responds, I think I'm a little bit in the middle. I'm not a youth anymore, and I don't feel like an elder. I feel like needing to bridge the gap sometimes. For me, as a Diné person, this is my personal perspective. I don't know if other Diné people, I don't speak for everybody, obviously none of us do, but I kind of break it down into like three different major audiences. I don't know if that's the right word, because on Navajo Nation, we have our government, which they're the elected officials, whether people vote or not. I mean, that's also a colonial construct. So there's the government that was put in place specifically to sign fossil fuel leases back in the early 20th century. And then we have the traditional elders, so like medicine people, knowledge holders, so folks that are still doing and practicing our old traditional ways, like Jonathan was mentioning. And then this other group we might call, I call the grassroots. So that would be us activists who kind of bridge the gap between tradition and then advocating in the political world. And oftentimes we're fighting the Navajo Nation. So like right now, the Navajo Nation government, they want to develop hydrogen and helium and whatever they can because of economic development. The good thing is the Navajo Nation has a law against uranium mining. So that always helps my work. And that's because uranium mining has killed a lot of my people. And we're still dealing with all of the radioactive waste. So it's easy for me to fight uranium issues on Navajo because of the law, but there's a lot of complications because of colonization. In the northwestern part of the state, that's called the checkerboard area. So the laws it's extremely complex because whoever regulates depends on which jurisdiction you're on. And sometimes that's different on the surface and then below the surface. So like water rights or mineral rights might not be the same, might not be owned by the owned, and that's the other thing is ownership. The Navajo Nation.
Hello again.
I was enjoying everyone's answers. For us, we definitely come up against opposition within the community from political leaders, business leaders, even traditional leaders, and it's rough because these are the people that you want to believe have your best interest as a community in mind in their decision making, and they often seem to be, in our case, the first ones ready to sell us out, whether it's for cryptocurrency or whatever other false solution they claim is going to save our islands, which are just working to get us underwater faster.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just add really quick, I don't know, Jonathan, if you wanted to add, but I feel like during our legislative session, we are kind of always undermined. Our analysis specifically like on things like hydrogen or whatever, and it's really disheartening because it's like, there's always a call for engagement of younger organizers, and when it actually happens, they write us off, and that could be politicians or other organizations, and really it's an elitism that's like based in white supremacy, and it's awful. And I feel like I don't know if they're still on there. I saw them on previously, but it's been good to be in community with folks who were in Los Jardines Institute, because both Sofia Martinez and Richard Moore were there for like the first People of Color Summits, and they were there when they were young people trying to build a lot of these spaces that now have unfortunately been co-opted by political elite. And I think that right now is the time for us to regain that power back. But Jonathan, I'll let you speak too.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I was thinking about your question that you asked just before. I don't know what happened. That was really weird. But I think, for me, I remember especially here, and I know it varies by family and community, obviously, but in my family, I'm only the second generation out of U.S. boarding schools. And so to remember that like our elders today very much for survival learned assimilation and were successfully colonized. And so we're dealing, unfortunately, with our communities, whether that's, our spiritual leaders or just elders in our communities or our governors or presidents, dealing with, unfortunately, colonized people that think it's, that have this mindset that it is okay to, sacrifice our resources or our cultural heritage in the name of profit or extraction or whatever that is. But also, that's really frustrating, obviously, but also remembering, I think, kind of like Julia was saying before she had to hop off, but honoring and remembering our ancestors as well. All of us, come from, like I said earlier, very resilient lines that obviously fought to still be here. And so remembering, those ancestors as well, and that they were, what they had to endure and push back against, and that we're just continuing that fight. And also, for young people in particular, I think it's really unique because, we look at just about every social movement throughout history, and it's our young people who are front and center. Right now, we see, kind of hand in hand with calls for, action on climate from young people across the country. We're also seeing massive, uprisings for gun violence and gun legislation, but also, going back into history of things like the Chicano uprisings and, even the civil rights movement, that all of these, spaces and movements were started by the young people. And even recently in Standing Rock, started, by our young people running all the way from North Dakota to DC. And so remembering as young people that that's kind of, the place in history that we hold, that we've always continued to push back against, these systems that have imposed whatever, whether it's reproductive rights or whatever, sovereignty rights, whatever it is, that, whatever they're trying to and force upon us, that we've always been there to push back. But yeah, I think that's what I would say in terms of at least, kind of dealing with those colonized mindsets. Unfortunately, I've definitely dealt with that from elders and community. But I also, and it's important for me to know, I've also, had elders come up to me crying because of the fact that they have to deal, with those mindsets at home, that these people that they trust and that they, that they want to trust and that they want to believe in, like you said, believe that they have their best interests at hand, unfortunately are falling into these false hydrogen schemes, even though we're there, even though we're there to say, no, this is a continuation of this trade-off capitalist system that Indigenous people have always been, a bargaining chip in. We've had to, I think it's just important to remember, we have both sides, and it's definitely really messy when, in some of these communities too, when we get in, we get into the money of it. I know, especially, yeah, exactly, especially, I think all of us know, we get into, what the money supposedly can bring. But I also know, here in New Mexico, we've had elders, found murdered with all that money just gone. And so it's been, in all different kinds of ways, it's just been violent upon, just violence upon our communities. And, I think about, we have fracking realities tours here in New Mexico that if any of you all ever come out, we'd love to, facilitate and get you guys, if that's something you would want to participate in. But to see, what these communities are enduring on the front line of the extraction, it's heartbreaking. And it's, it's important to see and recognize that there's a community here in New Mexico, in Counselor, New Mexico, over $1 billion has been extracted in resources from this community. And then you go and you see the community and, you ask yourself that question, has this community really benefited from, over $1 billion being extracted, like industry likes to say and taunt all the time, that's what they're doing for our state. And then you go see for yourself, like, is it really? And it's not. We still have communities here that don't have electricity, that don't have running water, that, are fighting for these basic necessities and rights to be met every single day still in the year 2023. But yeah, I think, that's what I would add on to your question.
Thank you so much. Those were amazing answers, by the way. I really appreciate it. And I'm excited that people got to tune in and hear that.
Yeah, sorry, just to finish my previous thought, and I'm so sorry, Jonathan, I don't think my mute was on. I made it snow. So to wrap up, we have the government, the colonial structure, we have our traditional elders, and then we have a lot of just the community folks. Some people engage in the political mayhem, some don't. So for Navajo Nation specifically, we are constantly at odds with the government, with the colonial government, and the people who the work that I do, and I'm sure this goes in line. I don't want to speak for Jonathan and Julia, but I think all of us as Indigenous people coming from, you know, some teachings and things that our elders and our ancestors have maintained for generations, I think for me, that's what the work is about. So it's unfortunate that there's uranium at sacred places. So this is one of the big issues, is protection of sacred sites. People argue, well, all of Mother Earth is sacred. So we have a lot of our traditional ways intact that our elders, the traditional leaders, you know, advocate to protect, while at the same time the government the Navajo Nation government is pushing for the fracking Jonathan was mentioning. So when Jonathan's talking about Chaco Canyon, my government wants to lessen the protections that were put on around Chaco, because those are 1,000-year-old petroglyphs, that the entire architecture, everything, it needs to be protected and maintained. But because our colonial government is charged or thinks they have to work toward economic development, that's where things got messed up with colonization. I believe capitalism and all these other so-called priorities have really impacted our traditional ways, because we're no longer dependent on, you know, rainwater, especially with all the PFAS now. So all of these things, it's up to us to educate our elders. And it's the hardest thing. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to Congress or lobbied in your state capitol or even in your city council. To me, it's the hardest thing to lobby our elders in the Navajo Nation government, because those are the people. I mean, it's easy for me to yell at a non-native person in the colonial government. It's easy for me to protest in Santa Fe and that kind of thing. But to go home and then have to convince your own people that, no, this is not a good idea. So for Navajo Nation, again, I'm in the city, so it's a little bit hard for me. There's a lot of people on the res, on the Navajo Nation. There's a lot of NGOs and individual activists. There's I would say, a very strong movement. And I think our movements, Jonathan mentioned the Pueblo Revolt. Our people, we've been fighting for a long time. And so I think it's just in our nature. But how we do it, it's incredibly nuanced because of colonization, because of the laws. And like with uranium mining, I'm dealing with nuclear stuff that's on the federal level, but the state of New Mexico is like super pro-nuclear. And that's one of the things I just wanted to wrap up with, is we're fighting on the Navajo Nation and New Mexico. There's no mining right now, but there is mining in the United States. When all of the stuff happened with Russia invading Ukraine, the United States lost their supply of uranium. So where do we get uranium? I'm not sure, but there's a company I'm working on. I'm wearing my Hall No t-shirt. We're fighting a uranium mine at the Grand Canyon. So there is a push for domestic uranium mining. So this is something I'm fighting, and uranium feeds both the nuclear energy and nuclear weapons, which again, going back to something Jonathan said about the United States being one of the biggest polluters, that's also the United States military. So we're fighting all of these different issues when it comes to uranium, but nuclear energy is not a solution to climate change. Nuclear energy is a false solution, because you need fossil fuels to produce the energy, the fuel. So uranium doesn't just come out of the ground magically, and you can't make uranium fuel from nuclear power. You need to transport that stuff, and you need a lot of other energy to make nuclear energy. And then afterwards, the waste, what do we do with the waste? It's forever. So this is something I've been talking to my elders about, and the Navajo Nation hasn't taken a stance against this nuclear waste dump that's being proposed in New Mexico, but this is one of the biggest fights I'm a part of right now, is to stop a nuclear waste dump. It would be a national waste dump for waste from all the commercial nuclear power plants. So in the United States, there's nowhere to put nuclear waste, and this is one of the issues we're having to educate not just our indigenous elders. The Pueblos have done a great job in fighting the nuclear waste dump and coming out against it and talking about climate and energy issues. But it's a lot harder for Navajo Nation when they're pushing the fracking and other stuff. So I'll just stop there. It just takes a lot of work, and it does take patience, and then using our culture to convince our elders this is, you know, this is not the way to make money. There's other ways for us to protect our people. And that's the hardest part, though, is because of the money situation. Thanks.
And especially the money situation being something that our communities were put in by the people that we're fighting. And so it's, I mean, not gonna lie, there are days where it's just completely disheartening because you feel like you're fighting people on, like, at every level. Every time you turn around, it's a fight. And it's like, could I just have a day where I have like one win, even if it means I just made my bed?
One, you know, I mean, we could keep this conversation going for a very long time, and I hope that we can have more Insta lives and you know, keep the conversation happening between you all, and have others join, and have folks be able to like more directly ask you questions in this way, because it's nice to you know, reach a different audience on Instagram, and connect with different folks that maybe are not connecting to the Hoodwinked webinars and Zoom and all that jazz. One quick question, and I know we got to wrap up because I don't want to take up too much of everyone's time, but you know, hearing what you were just talking about, Leona, and you know, what everyone's been talking about, like someone who's watching this, you know, I'm here in New York City right now. What would you recommend that folks who are not in New Mexico, or you know, not in these lands, would you recommend like a certain way of getting involved, like some action item, or would you recommend just, you know, starting local and tuning into like, you know, what's happening here locally? Because there's something happening everywhere, right? That we can all be way more involved in our local politics and the local fights, and connecting with, you know, I could go into millions of things happening right here in New York, but I won't right now.
Sure, I can jump in because I want to give the last word to either Shah or Jonathan. So I think the anti-nuclear movement in the United States is an interesting place, and I don't think anyone needs to join it per se, or to be honest, I don't think people need to join organizations. I mean, I think it's good to start your own organization if you have a group of people to do some work. But I do believe strongly in strategic planning to figure out what is the issue, and then how to go about figuring out what to do. In New York, there's Indian Point. So I'm fighting a company called Holtec. And I think one way that we can connect is to fight Holtec all over the world, for people that want to fight nuclear stuff. And there's people in New York City already organized, but like I said, you don't have to join their group. There's ways you can talk to your own elected officials or just educate other people. Because right now, Holtec wants to dump 1 million or so many gallons of radioactive water from the power plant they just bought, which is about 30 miles north of the city. So they want to put that radioactive water in the Hudson. And I don't think people in New York City want that. But the thing is, they don't know about it. So how do people fight something they don't know about? I mean, so that's one thing, is just to talk about it. And so Indian Point is a power plant north of New York City. Holtec owns power plants. They've been buying them all over the place. But you don't have to fight, like I said, you don't have to fight nuclear. I think the easiest thing, and I do believe it's important to write letters to your elected officials, even just a quick email that says, hey, I was on this webinar and I learned about this nuclear thing. especially if you have nuclear stuff in your state, you can focus on that one issue. But the nuclear waste dump I mentioned, it's going to have national transport. So there's national issues that affect everybody across the board. But I think you said it already, Laura, just start locally on your own concern. I know I met my first EJ training, I met a bunch of teenage women doing something because the nail salon was contaminating their neighborhood. And I thought that was really interesting. And so it's kind of the same issue, but it's different things in our environments hurting us. And so I think it's just educating people and then taking whatever appropriate action, direct action, political action, spiritual, doing your prayers. That's really important, I think, for Indigenous people, is to have those protections in place. So that's where I'll leave it. Thanks.
Thank you, Leona. Shaw and Jonathan, would either of you like to share some final thoughts? It can be on that question, or, you know, some final parting thoughts for our loyal followers who've been watching, or folks who've tuned in more recently. Thanks to everyone.
Sorry. Okay.
Oh no, go ahead. I was going to give you last word, but yeah, no, go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was trying to give you last word. Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, I would definitely agree. You know, get involved locally. You know, we have Indigenous people everywhere in this country and beyond that are fighting against, you know, these same institutions of militarization, of extractive industries, and just, you know, all of these things that are intertwined. Definitely, you know, there's, like Leona said, there are different paths. If, you know, you need organizations to kind of help you find that, you know, navigate that political landscape, there's tons that you can get involved in, or you can, you know, definitely, you know, just stay as an individual and participate in, you know, whatever ways your capacity allows. I think that's something really beautiful about these movement spaces, as well as that there's truly, you know, spaces for everyone. Just whatever, you know, skill set that you have to offer, there are different ways that you can contribute to any movement that you're called to. But yeah, I think I see comments. Yeah, we have our No False Solutions Coalition here in New Mexico. We're going to be continuing to stand up against these proposed hydrogen production legislation and hydrogen hubs. I know that there is a Southwest or Tri-West mountain coalition of, I think it's New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah. I'm not entirely sure, but there are where they're trying to propose other hydrogen hubs and hydrogen legislation as well. But yeah, just anywhere that you can get involved, I would definitely encourage, especially, you know, young people of color. Yeah, and I will. Yeah, there you go.
Last word, no pressure. Actually, so when I introduced myself, I had mentioned this, and this is one of my major soapboxes. This is a hill I will die on, and that is things like solidarity, mutual aid. For a lot of people, these feel like really revolutionary things, but for some of us, these things are actually just part of the culture. And so I am constantly reminding people that solidarity is not theoretical. It is not abstract. It is literally building relationships, and not transactional relationships, because that is how the colonizers got us. You cannot build solidarity on transactional relationships. Solidarity is rooted in, hey, I met Jonathan and Leona through this IG Live. I'm really interested in what they do. I care about them and their movement. And in order to honor my ancestors, because I'm a settler here, I support them. Whatever I can do to amplify them, to uplift whatever they have going on right now, even that. So go follow everyone who you've seen here, follow who they follow, see what they're putting in their stories and resharing, and reach out to people online. I make it a point, whether it's through Pacifica Uprising or through my personal account, to be very accessible, because I'm an introvert and I don't necessarily like going outside and being around people, but I'm a firm believer with 20 plus years experience in building digital community. Pacifica Uprising has a small board of directors. There are 3 of them plus me as the ED. We have never met in person altogether. We have members who have never met at all. but these are people that I've been building with for years, because digital community is just as important as in-person community. And when you connect with people and you can see where your movement spaces are related, because everything is interconnected, you can help each other, whether you're in that space with them or not. And even if it is just sharing their story, you can be a vase that is nurturing that flower, and someone else sees it and goes out and spreads that story and lets people know. And even if that's all you can do, don't ever listen to anyone who's calling you like a keyboard warrior. Like, share stories, make sure people hear about it. Grassroots over big time, like mainstream media. This is how things get done. This is how we've always gotten things done. If it weren't for my ancestors doing it, I wouldn't be here today. So like in the Pacific, we rely on coconut wireless. Different communities have their own setup. Do that, share it with your friends. And if you have questions, reach out to those accounts. Like whether you're interested in abolition, bodily autonomy, climate justice, all of this is interconnected. So just reach out to someone, ask if they know anyone in your area, and connect and really have those relationships, like build real relationships. And that is the one thing the enemy, the oppressor, does not want to see us do. So do it. And that's my soapbox. And now I want to play with these filters like Leona because these look fun.
I'm trying to send hearts. I think when you're a presenter, I don't think you can send hearts. So
I don't
like that.
think so.
Well, thank you so much, Laura. I don't know if you froze maybe, but I'm probably gonna hop off here soon.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. Laura froze on my end too, but
Same.
thank you all so much. We'll definitely continue to be in touch, and like you just said, we'll definitely be in solidarity, and I'll be supporting both of you in all the ways that I can.
Absolutely. Same from our end.
Yeah, awesome. I'm looking forward to learning more about your work, and I know we're already connected now, so we can.
Y'all are basically my cousins now, so whatever you need, I'm here to uplift and amplify.
Awesome. Love it. All right. Well, I'm going to jump off. I don't know about Laura.
You guys have a great evening.
You too.